Welcome to the Road to Wellness podcast. I'm Brad Pitsley, founder of 1000 Roads. Years ago, I was battling Lyme disease, melanoma, and severe autoimmunity. That journey led me deep into the world of mitochondrial health, oxygen therapy, and recovery. On this show, I talk with doctors, researchers, innovators, and people on the recovery journey as we explore new ways to help people reclaim their health and energy. Hey guys, I'd like to welcome you to the 1000 Roads podcast. Today we have on a very special guest, Dr. Katie Deming. I was on Dr. Deming's podcast about a year ago. She was a classically trained oncologist. She is also an inventor and also a TEDx speaker. And she is redefining cancer prevention, treatment, and healing. After 2 decades as a radiation oncologist and a healthcare leader, she shifted to holistic practices to help clients detoxify, nourish their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual selves so that they can activate their innate ability to heal. And I just love that line, Katie. Your passion shows through in everything you do. Thank you for being on our show.
Thank you, Brad. It's my privilege to be here with you. Awesome.
So to start us out, talk to us a little bit about how you got into this, how you got into oncology. Was there a personal connection to it, or is it just a fascination?
Yeah. So as an undergrad, I was a biopsychology and neuroscience major. And I didn't know really what I could do with that. I was like naively at the time, you could do anything with an undergraduate degree, I realize now. But at the time I was like, oh, well, I guess you could go to medicine, or I could become a researcher in neuroscience. And my mom was really discouraging me from medical school because she knew I wanted to have a family, and she was a nurse practitioner. She worked in the ER, and she was like, I don't know if you want to do that. And so I was like, okay, well, what would be like the hardest part about medicine? And maybe I could just cross this off my list. And this gives you just a little glimpse into who I am and how I approach life. But I was like, well, I really don't like the idea of people dying. And I've only had, at that time, one of my good friends when I was in 4th grade died of leukemia, and that was really terrifying as a 4th grader. And so I was afraid of death, and I said, well, I'll just go and volunteer for hospice, and maybe that's way I can cross medicine off my list. And as you can see with me sitting here after 2 decades as an oncologist, that didn't work out in the way that I had expected. And working at hospice as a volunteer really changed my life. And being around people who were reflecting on their own mortality and their life and what was important to them, I learned so many things that were just completely revolutionary for me as a 20-year-old who, at 20 years old, you think the world revolves around you and you're so caught up in your own stuff. And to hear this wisdom was really profound for me. And from that, I decided, I'm like, no, I definitely want to go into medicine, but specifically, I want to be with people who have cancer. And not because I loved the science of healing cancer, but I loved the intimacy of being with people when life became real and when they were facing something that was potentially life-threatening, to be there with them in that space. And that's really what led me into medicine. And then eventually I ended up in radiation oncology for my specialty.
Wow. And what were some of the most profound things you heard from folks in hospice?
Well, it's interesting because they're the same things that I've heard now as an oncologist, and have, spent time with thousands of patients who are, facing the end of their life, because a lot of my practice was palliative as a radiation oncologist. And the number one thing that people say is that I wish that I had the courage to be myself. I had lived my life to work or to do the things that everyone else wanted me to do. And when they reflected back on their lives, they were really clear that they hadn't been true to themselves. And actually, that's been like really a guiding post for me in my career, and actually my transition out of Western medicine. That was like one of the things that really guided me. It's like, okay, who am I? What am I here to express in this lifetime And am I true to that? Or am I just following what everyone else wants me to do, or is the right path according to society or whatever?
Wow. And talk to us a little bit about that transition. How long did you spend in traditional medicine, and what was kind of the final, trigger point for you to take a turn?
So I practiced as a radiation oncologist for 20 years. And in 2020, and I was also a healthcare leader. So I was in charge of end-to-end cancer care for a large healthcare organization. And actually in 2020, I had been nominated to become the national medical director for one of the largest healthcare organizations for cancer care in the US, in charge of the prevention, screening, treatment, and end-of-life care for 16 million Americans, actually. So wow. This was like at the height of my career. I had been nominated for this position because of the work that I had done in my region. And I didn't get that position. It actually came down to me and one other woman who was a researcher, and she got the position. And I knew when that happened that I was like, I know I'm meant to build something, but I don't think it's in the system. Like, I don't think it's in this way. And I just knew that when that happened, that it was happening for me. And then a week later, I had an experience that is called a shared-death experience. And many people are familiar with a near-death experience, which is where someone's heart stops and they have this outer body, metaphysical experience of the light and the love and all of that. And then they come back into their body and they're changed after that, right? So a near-death experience is something I think a lot of people are familiar with, but there's something called a shared death experience, which is where someone who is not dying, but could be at the scene where someone is dying, they connect with them on a soul level and actually have a similar metaphysical experience as someone who has a near-death experience and experience that love and that light and just the ineffable reality of love. Like, it's just inexplainable. But so that happened to me about a week after I had had this interview and didn't get this job. I had this shared death experience where I just came back after that and was changed. Like, I can't say it any other way other than to know that I needed to do something different. I had been getting messages for I guess it was a year. It started in 2019. I started to have these feelings like, you're not supposed to be practicing radiation oncology, which made no sense to me because I trained my whole life. I didn't have my first job until I was 32 because the training is so long, right? I was in school and training until I was 32 to become a radiation oncologist. So this message, when I started to get it, was like, it made zero sense to me. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what would I do if I didn't practice radiation oncology? And I'm an inventor, so I had a business that was related to that invention, but I knew that was more of a passion project of something that I wanted to do for people who had cancer to help them, but it wasn't like my exit out of medicine. And so I really ignored that message for about a year. And then after this shared death experience, it just became very clear, like, no, you actually have to leave. You're not in the right place. Something is not aligned here. And it was very confusing for me because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. But I started to also recognize after this event that Western medicine, in the way that I had been taught, although effective at treating the symptoms of cancer, really was missing the deeper aspect of the healing. And that, I now have, come to learn that medicine, or that healing, is really, illness in the body is a sign that something is out of balance, that is often much deeper than just the symptoms, the tumor that's arising in the body. And so as I basically sat with this after this experience and started to research, okay, well, what is real healing if this isn't real healing? And this was a complete paradigm shift for me because I was 100% in the system. I mean, I had bought in. I was running cancer care for, large healthcare organization. I was bought into the system. But as I started to do research and understand, I realized that the biggest thing that opened my eyes was the emotional aspect of illness. Yeah. And I started to learn these things, like, number one, about metabolic health, number two, about emotions, number three, about the imbalance of the way that we're living in modern lifestyle and seeing the cancer rates rise. And why are these younger and younger people entering my office if we're doing such a good job? And as I put all of that together, I realized, okay, I see why I have to leave. It's not because this is wrong and people shouldn't do Western medicine. I absolutely feel like there's a place for that. But for me, I needed to move out of that to start to address the root cause of why people were getting sick. And then the main thing was, why is it now 1 in 2 people get cancer in their lifetime, where 100 years ago that was 1 in 33? Like,
Wow.
what is happening that we're getting so sick? And it's not just cancer, it's other chronic illnesses. So this was, that's a short way of explaining that story of how I exited out, but that was what happened.
Did I hear that right? 1 in 2 people get cancer. 50% of the population can expect cancer in their lifetime.
In 2026, yep, that is correct.
That's, wow. Yeah, that is, I mean, we all know but that prevalent is a little bit shocking, I guess.
Well, we should be shocked. And
Right.
we should be outraged. Like,
Yeah.
why we're spending more and more money on healthcare and our life expectancy is decreasing. And now 50% of the population is slated to get cancer in their lifetime, which is exponential from what it was 100 years ago. And then diabetes, obesity, neurodegenerative disease, all those things are just skyrocketing, right? All of this is happening, and we're not changing our plan. Like, what are we doing? So for me, that was like, I've got to do something. I know I'm only one person, but I'm like, I got to start talking about this so people understand the gravity of it.
Right. Absolutely. Wow. And so you've been outside of the Western kind of traditional paradigm here for several years now, and helping people. Describe a little bit about, what does it look like? What's the journey for people when they reach your doorstep? Like, do most of them start, is there like a traditional kind of story arc with them? They go into traditional, or they, and they fall out for some reason, or is it that they lost belief even before they were diagnosed, or what does that look like?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting about the people that are attracted to me is that I really bridge these two worlds, right? Because I'm not straight up in the natural medicine, and I'm not straight up in the conventional. I really am open to all of it because I've been part of the system and traditional oncology for so many years, and then now have spent the last several years really studying natural healing. And so I have a real broad spectrum of clients who find me and in some ways it's refreshing to find someone who's not like 100% natural and not 100% in the conventional, because I can go where people need me to go, because this is one of the things that I think is really important, is that healing is individual, and each person is unique and needs different things, and based on their values and their, what's important to them, and I am always going to meet someone where they are at and honor that truth. Because just like I said, remember, the number one regret that people have at the end of their life is that they didn't live a life that was authentic to them. And healing is part of that. And one of the things in Western medicine is sometimes you can be, pushed into doing something that you don't feel like is right for you, but that's what the protocol is, and you go down that route. And I always want people to know that they have someone who can support them, in whatever feels right for them. But the interesting thing is my practice has really shifted. When I started my practice I started in integrative practice in 2023, because it took me a couple of years to exit out of Western medicine, because it created quite a lot of change for me in my life. But in 2022, I left. And then in 2023, I started my integrative practice. And over that time, what I found was it's a very noisy space of being in the alternative cancer space. There's so many things you could be doing, and so many experts saying completely opposite things. It's a very confusing place to be. Even as like me, who has 20 years as an experience as an oncologist, I get confused in this space. And there were lots of things that you can do. And my approach was really holistic. It's making sure we're addressing the physical healing, mental healing, emotional and spiritual alignment. When I talk about spiritual healing, I'm talking about just alignment with what is true for you and whatever is your, divine essence, your whatever you believe in.
Yep.
That's what I'm talking about from that perspective. But the interesting thing is that the most powerful tool in my practice was water fasting. I didn't even know anything about this before. And this is the interesting thing about my trajectory, and I share this all on my podcast, is I left my Western medicine career. I had already started my podcast and before that, but I decided I'm going to be totally honest and just share, what am I learning? What should I have been taught in Western medicine that I wasn't? And what am I learning in this new practice and going out? And so, my evolution of my practice has been all documented through my podcast, but I did all the different stuff in the natural space, and it was very noisy and very confusing and too much. And so I was like, okay, I have to simplify. I have to focus on something that I know is making the biggest difference. And for me, that was prolonged water fasting. So anywhere from like 14 days up to 30 days with no food, just water, you can actually make tumors go away. And that my first two people who fasted, one had breast cancer that had metastasized to her brain. And after 17 days, the tumor in her brain was completely gone. Like they couldn't see it on the MRIs, totally gone. And then my second client that I fasted, she did 14 days with breast cancer. The surgeon wanted to do a mastectomy. She did the water fast. We do all kinds of other work during that, emotional work, mental work, spiritual, all of that, and also work on their nutrition so that when they come out, they're eating in a way that supports their microbiome and their immune system and all of that. But the second person who fasted, when she came out, her mammogram was clear and she didn't end up having a mastectomy. So that was like, got my radar up. I was like, oh, hey, there's something here. I don't even see these results in like radiation. And then over time, I've just now been fasting more and more people. And now I've probably fasted 75 people. And I'm really the only person who's doing this in the cancer space, fasting for cancer. And I started it because I was like, oh my gosh, it makes tumors go away, which is amazing. But the interesting thing is not everyone's tumor goes away with fasting because it's the body's self-healing, right? So it's the body's going to do its own thing. I can never promise to anyone, what their body is going to do with a water fast. But what I find through the water fasting is that you're healing the human. People come out of this experience totally transformed, emotionally, mentally, physically connected to themselves. I'll tell you a crazy story. I just met with a client who finished a water fast in October, 43 years old, a woman. She got pregnant 5 weeks later. Like people think like fasting is going to be so hard on my body and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my goodness.
Right.
Like she was not well before she started her fast and actually came out way healthier. And then the unexpected, there's so many things that like go along with that, which at 43 and all of that to get pregnant, but it just shows you our bodies, like when you can really bring your body down to the studs and rebuild it with the right foods and make sure that people are connected and emotionally working through their issues, they come out really healthy and well, which is incredible.
Impressive. So I imagine one of the hardest things about the water fast is getting people psychologically, they're not eating anything for 14 plus days. So no calories whatsoever. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is it just water? Is it water and tea?
So no tea, no coffee, just water. And then many fasting centers don't do any electrolytes or minerals, but I do electrolytes and minerals with my clients.
That makes sense.
But that's it. Yeah.
Wow. And so I imagine a hard part of coaching that would be like, how do you help people mentally prepare for that? That's like, I know when any of us get hungry, there's this almost irrational psychological voice inside our body. And I've felt this before. It's like, you need to eat right now. And you're like, no, actually I don't. I know what you're telling me, but so, and I probably like many of us, I fasted for a day or two or even 3, but the thought of 14 or plus days sounds pretty intense.
Yeah. Well, it is mostly mental. It is way more mental. But the beautiful thing about the people who come to me and then decide to fast, and I do it as a group actually. So I have 12 people at a time, and they're remote, so they'll be in different locations, and we meet on Zoom. But the beautiful thing is that when you're in a group like this, even though the brain is telling you that you're hungry and you need to eat, when you have someone who's watching you, it's like, you actually don't. You're okay. You're safe. And these are the symptoms, kind of managing, coaching them through, the normal symptoms that people experience, like day 1 to 3 is hard because you're flipping that switch from using primary glucose as your fuel to ketones, which we can live on ketones, for like 40 days, probably longer, but, safely, probably 30 to 40 days. But initially they feel terrible because they're making that switch, that glucose to ketone switch.
Yeah.
And then once you get past the 3rd day, they get onto the ketones and they're feeling better, but then the detox starts, right? So you start detoxifying the body, and that can be hard to day 7, where they can have body aches, headaches, that kind of thing. But the beautiful thing is actually, if you can get people to fast through 7 days, on day 8, they come alive and they feel really good, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
So it's definitely way more mental and less physical, but it's also physically challenging, managing through these symptoms. But when you have a group of people that you're doing it with, and that they'll say, well, I'm not going to show up tomorrow and tell you guys that I ate pizza last night. So, there's that
Totally.
accountability of being within the group. But then the other thing is that we have coaches that are coming in and coaching. I have a subconscious coach. I have a mindset coach. I have an emotional healing coach. We have a somatic coach. We have a chef and nutritionist. We have someone who facilitates connection calls. So we're really doing way more than just abstaining from food. But what's so interesting is we use food as a numbing, as a way of coping. Mm-hmm. And by taking that away, people start to have the stuff come up because they can't now numb it, and also we limit screen time. We tell them to get off social media. We're really fasting from life. We're stopping their world. And that's uncomfortable for sure.
Yeah. So it's fair to say there may be a self-selection into people who can actually do this. Now, one of the things I love about you is you've got such emotional and spiritual depth when you talk about these topics, but on top of that, you have all this wonderful scientific knowledge. And talk to me about what you've learned in kind of the biology of cancer through this. I mean, to me, this sounds like the things that the words that are ringing in my head immediately are obviously the metabolic hypothesis for cancer, and you're triggering autophagy. And, so talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you're exactly correct. So cancer is a metabolic condition. Cancer is a problem of the mitochondria. And this goes back to the work of Otto Warburg, who showed that cancer cells, by definition, use glucose as their primary fuel. Now we know that they also use glutamine, but glucose is the primary fuel. And the reason why is because cancer cells have either dysfunctional or deficient mitochondria. And so they switch from using oxidative phosphorylation as their primary metabolism or respiration within the cells, which requires mitochondria, to fermentation, which is like an ancient primitive form of metabolism that like single-celled organisms use. But in humans, we have the ability, our cells can either use fermentation or oxidative phosphorylation. Healthy, robust cells are going to be using oxidative phosphorylation because they have healthy mitochondria. But if those mitochondria are damaged, dysfunctional, or deficient, you can have this switch. And that is really what cancer is that cancer is cells that have lost the ability to do oxidative phosphorylation, and they are using fermentation as their primary source of metabolism. And when they do that, it's really interesting because they start to act like single-celled organisms, right? So you think of a cell, let's just take breast cancer because that was my specialty for, 2 decades. But breast cells function together as an organ, right? And those cells don't function independently. They're in unison with the other cells of that organ. But when you have a cell flip and using fermentation, it starts to lose the contact with the other cells around it. It has to do with the charge in the cell membrane, but you have these changes within that cell that they start to ignore the normal cells, like signaling of regulated cell growth. And that's when you see this dysregulated cell growth and increased proliferation of these cells, is because they start behaving like a single celled organism. And also the mitochondria that are at the core of this, and also at the core of all the other chronic illnesses that we're seeing, diabetes, obesity, neurodegenerative disease, all of them. But it basically, when you have mitochondria that are not working properly, the mitochondria determine cell regulation. And so cells become dysregulated. And this is really the problem with cancer, is it is a metabolic problem. And Western medicine not only doesn't really address that, they actually will tell people it doesn't matter at all. And I say this too, I'm horrified. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Calories are calories. Like, this is what we're taught. We're not taught anything about nutrition in medical school, but in my training and stuff, my attendings who I learned under as a resident would say they could eat donuts or they could eat, chicken, and it's the same because it's calories. And I'm like, oh my goodness, right. I said these things. And so this is a big problem, because Western medicine is completely missing the mark on what I was taught. And actually what's interesting, as a radiation oncologist, you have to go through 2 years of radiation physics and also radiation biology and cancer biology. So I had to study these things at a very deep level. But what we're taught in Western medicine, oncology, is that you've got DNA damage, and that DNA damage in the nucleus that is either caused by inherited, genetic disorders or genetic, damage from environmental toxins or whatever at the DNA level within the nucleus. And those changes in the DNA then affect the, proteins that are made and basically the expression of those cancer cells. But the interesting thing is, when you understand this problem of the mitochondria, it turns out that when you have dysfunctional mitochondria, and a cell starts using fermentation, which is this ancient primitive form of metabolism, in the presence of oxygen, because normally single-celled organisms aren't in a high oxygen environment. But now if you have these, we call them cancer cells, but if you have these cells that don't have functioning mitochondria, they start doing fermentation, but you have oxygen around, which is basically what you do, is basically what can happen is that the oxidative, that oxygen is, you create free radicals from the dysfunctional mitochondria, and those oxidative radicals actually damage the nuclear DNA. And that is why we are seeing damaged DNA in cancer cells in the nucleus, but instead of it being the cause of the cancer, it is actually the effect of this dysfunctional metabolism with deficient or dysfunctional mitochondria. So it just
the funny thing about this is, when I hear it and I listen to it, is when I was, when we were growing up, we were told is all of our intelligence as a human being is in our brain. And then that kind of transposed into all of the intelligence of the cell is that DNA in the nucleus. And as we've gotten to understand the nuance of it, is, hey, wow, there's neurons inside your heart, they're inside the lining of your gut, you have distributed intelligence all throughout your body. And it's the same thing with the cell, is that we want to have this view of life as a command and control. There's this control center and everything else is doing it, but there's a lot more to it than what meets the eye. And it feels like a lot of our preconceptions flow into our understanding that aren't necessarily congruent with the way it really is.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. And also, I love that you brought up the brain. It's like we think that consciousness is here, but like consciousness is really in the field, and we're an antenna for the consciousness, and what we perceive is related to whether we're toxified and all these things. That's why we're sick and disconnected, is because we're the same thing that's affecting our brain. Our cells are also antennas for information, and the mitochondria are the ones who are receiving the information and sending the signals. So it's so vast and deep that it's like you can go so far with this, but you're 100% correct. We've got it all like focused in on the wrong spot.
And your point is mitochondria we're finding they're at the root of just about any disease you can find is dysfunctional mitochondria. And it's not surprising to me, because as I've looked at it, they're like the most fragile organelle inside of a cell. They're dealing with oxidative stress every moment of every day. And so a slight imbalance, because they're effectively the engine burning the fuel, they're the first thing to feel the fire. And so they're the first thing to kind of go wrong. I mean, they weren't, it's a captured bacteria captured millions and billions of years ago that we captured because it was so smart at utilizing oxygen. And we said, hey, you're better at creating energy than us, so come on in. But it's also something that's so fragile. And you're right. When it's damaged, it's like, it's the first thing to go. It's the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah. Well, and also it just explains why we're getting so sick. Because the mitochondria, if you poison them, glyphosate is a perfect example, right? We've got glyphosate everywhere. We're all eating glyphosate, even if we think we're eating organic, it's just everywhere.
Yes.
So the mitochondria are sensitive to toxins in our environment, which we are swimming in toxins, unfortunately, in the modern world.
Yep.
And the mitochondria are very sensitive to emotional trauma. And this is the explanation of, because people think like emotional trauma related to illness is like some, kind of soft science or something. It's like, no, it comes to the mitochondria, that the mitochondria get shocked when you have an emotional trauma or significant stress. And so the mitochondria...
what's funny about... Sorry to interrupt you, but what's so funny about that is people do have that issue, but like we all know this. Let's say like you have this really stressful environment, all of a sudden your gut like is wrenching or something. Like there's this mind-body connection intuitively. We've all felt it, and yet for people to try to like wash that away seems crazy to me when the word itself is dis-ease. Disease is dis-ease of the body, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the beautiful thing is I think now there are more people talking about this, and also now because there's so much talk about the mitochondria, you can connect it to something scientifically. It makes sense. I mean, if people really think about it, stressful events, people often get sick after, right? You think about finals when you're in college, right? You're like pushing yourself, and then everyone gets sick after, right? Just from all of that stress on your body. But with the mitochondria, when you understand the science of that, it's like, oh, okay, there's a physical reason in the body why this is happening. And this is why we need to be paying attention to these other factors in our life. And also sunlight, right? So all the things that we're supposed to be getting to be healthy human beings, to have healthy, high-functioning mitochondria, like going out and connecting with nature, being in the sun. We've been told by the industrial medical complex that the sun is bad when it's been around for millions of years. And actually humans have done really well with the sun up until recently, when we all started wearing sunglasses and sunscreen. But it's like all of these things tie into the mitochondria, and they are very sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. And so you talked about a little bit about some of this emotional and spiritual transformation folks are seeing as well when they're going through your program. Talk to us a little bit about that and what that looks like for them. Yeah.
So like you talked about with the fasting, that it's mostly mental. I think about this experience. I started it thinking it's all about autophagy, right? It's all about getting the body into this state of using its own disease tissue for its fuel, which is, ultimately one of the mechanisms that is at work with fasting. But what I found, what was most powerful about fasting, is really stopping people's world, because when they fast with me, they rest and getting out of their everyday stuff. And when you rest and you take away the coping mechanisms of food, screens, social media, all of that stuff, what happens is people start to have the emotional things that are just inside them already start to surface. And I saw this even before I started fasting, where I would have clients be working with some practitioners that did emotional work, not traditional therapy. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with traditional therapy, but when someone is healing, traditional therapy can actually flame the fire a little bit, because you're basically just talking about the things, whereas work like subconscious work, where we're looking to release it from the subconscious mind where most trauma is stored, is much more effective. And so in the fasting, I started to see these emotions starting to surface. And because I had seen in my practice working with these practitioners, so those are my coaches who are in my program. And basically what we're teaching people is, number one, how to work on releasing past trauma through emotional, simple practices like activating both sides of your brain is one way of getting the brain to be able to access deep memories and release them in a very simple, non-traumatic way. And also helping people become more fluid with their emotions, because most of us have not been taught how to let emotions run through us. We've been taught either don't be overly emotional, or you're too angry, or you're too this or whatever, because human beings are emotional beings. Like, we have emotions. It's part of the human experience. And I think everyone recognizes that. But what we've been taught to do is kind of push them down, right?
Yeah.
And so what we do is we teach people how to activate both sides of their brain so that when they experience emotions, they just are able to ride it as a wave. Like, emotions are just a wave. It's just going to come up, it's going to crest, and then it's going to go down if you have both sides of the brain activated at the same time. And so we teach people these techniques so that they can become more fluid with their emotions, because the other part of this is, even if you heal past trauma and get to like the root of maybe why someone got sick, if you don't teach them how to be with their emotions in a healthy way moving forward, we're always going to have stress. We're always going to have things that come up. We want to give people the tools to stay healthy emotionally after the fast. Right. And so fasting is just a beautiful way of helping them get clear. We're getting all the toxins out of their body, since the toxins are stored in our fat. Once you get to day 4 of fasting and the body's starting to use the fatty acids in our cells to create ketones to live off, what you're doing is you're dumping those toxins in the fat cells. And initially that makes people feel kind of sick. So that's the day 4 to 7 that makes people feel kind of bad. But once you get through that, part of the problem with our emotional fluency is we're so toxified. So by cleaning people out and then giving them the coaching and the tools, you're just allowed to move through you're able to move through things in a way that I think is harder when you're in a fed state. So
makes sense. I mean, obviously when we have folks starting exercise with oxygen therapy, when they're very sick, they'll go through that detox early on as well. We always tell folks to start slow when they're really sick because of that, because it's the same thing, which is it's increased fat burning, it's oxidation, and it's quite frankly, when you restore the metabolic balance, all of a sudden the cells have built up all these waste products inside when they're in this low energy state, and they just start dumping. And if they dump too much, if your kidneys and your elimination organs are overwhelmed, then it's just not a fun ride. I've been there. It makes just about anything difficult.
Absolutely.
So you've before you kind of settled in water fasting, you obviously were dabbling in a lot of different things in holistic health, and you've seen things that have worked, and you've seen people make a lot of mistakes. Talk to us about kind of what you've seen work better and worse, and what are some of the major mistakes you see folks making in, when they have cancer?
It's a big question. And I think, one of the things that I think is, and I don't want to say mistake, because I don't think that anyone, I think everyone's healing journey, you go through the things that we're meant to go through, right, on your own life's journey. But I think some of the things where people can get really caught up is that they're listening to everyone else and operating out of fear. Yeah. So fear is really, cancer is like one of people's biggest fear, right? And so now it's realized. So then they're like, I have reason to be afraid. So then they're making decisions from a state of being in fear. And that, I think, is one of the biggest calls that I would say to your audience, is that if you're dealing with a major diagnosis, including cancer, one of the very first things that you can do to really help yourself is to calm your nervous system and to get out of making decisions from fear. And sometimes, the health system, and I know this just because I designed some of these systems, like we would make it so that, the hospital systems are judged by Medicare on the speed from the diagnosis from the imaging to the biopsy, from the biopsy to the surgery to the chemo, whatever it is, like that whole thing. They've got these. Yeah, but what's interesting is I understand this like from a different angle. I think a lot of people feel like it's the doctors, like they just want to get the money, but the truth is they're measured on these metrics.
Which are thought to be correlated to outcomes.
Exactly. It correlates with outcomes. And so they are following these protocol and these guidelines to move people through really quickly. But you have time. So calming your nervous system, taking time to make decisions, and really understanding, okay, what are the risks associated with this treatment? What are the benefits? And do I really understand the risk-benefit ratio and how that plays into my values of what is it that I want to achieve? And slowing everything down. I think that's my number one piece of advice, is helping calm your nervous system, helping you to get out of fear, and then slowing the process down so that you can make good decisions. Because a lot of these decisions, once you make it, there's lifelong consequences to some of these treatments, and slowing that down. And then the other thing, and I think that you and I talked about this when I interviewed you on my podcast, is about overwhelm of like the protocol of like, 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night of doing all the things. And actually that's why I love your EWAT system, is because it's something that is short, right? 15 minutes. They can do that. It's manageable. And I think sometimes there's one of my clients, my fasting client, said this. She said, I was shitting all over myself. And I'm like, that is like, people feel like they should be doing all of these things. And the truth is that the best plan is the one that you can do. It fits into your life and actually makes you feel well, not makes you feel completely overwhelmed and like you're drowning and that your whole life revolves around supplements and protocols and all of these
I'm
things.
laughing because I can relate to this and I remember these days.
Yeah.
It gets real. It does. I mean, when I always said that, like it's like there are times when I was doing things from morning till night and you're like, I think I felt 10% better at the end of the day, but I don't think it was worth it because I lost the entire day. So what's the point? I love that. I love your perspective, because when you're dealing with something challenging, you do have two sides of the brain. Especially in cancer. I mean, people who get traditional treatments often die of a different cancer that was caused by the treatment. And when people realize that, it's a scary scenario, but so you want to go find a different way and you're looking for something else. But there's a lot of stuff out there to many people who just feels woohoo. And they're like, I want to believe something else. I want to have faith in it. But I also want to know there's like some science behind it. Like, I want to, like, I can't just be, I hope and pray, because a lot of people have been sick and hope and prayed, sort of thing. So that's one of the things I love that you do, is that you can blend, obviously, all those years you had to study oncology and all those decades you practiced it with the human understanding of that. It's really an amazing touch.
Thank you. Well, and the beautiful thing is that it is all based in science. Like this stuff is not woo-woo. It is
No,
definitely based in science, and
it
the
is.
science is catching up to be able to explain why these things work. But if we just look back, like just even a couple hundred years ago, we didn't have cancer. We didn't have, or we had, much, much less cancer, right? And we didn't
Right.
have, half the population obese and all of these things. And it was pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
Like we were living, with in line with our circadian biology, with the sun and with the seasons and eating in the seasons, right? And it's funny because as we've had more and more access to like food, you can have raspberries all year long and you can have pineapple in Portland in the middle of winter and whatever it is, like all these things, that's not nature, right?
No.
And so we've moved so far away from what we were designed actually to the way we were designed to live. And then everyone's surprised that we're sick. But the good news is that there's science to explain why, oh, you know what, actually the way that we were living before was much more aligned with what we're designed to do. And, so it's an interesting spot because one of the things that I actually just had a call with my fasters a couple hours ago, and we'll just talk about nutrition.
Yeah.
Like, there's all this stuff about how you should be vegan and raw vegan and, all of these, like all the full rainbow, you should every day be eating like all of these fruits and vegetables and all this stuff. And then you're like, but wait, like, how is that natural? Like, when were we ever able to eat all those foods? You basically, if we start to just simplify things, it's a lot less confusing, but you have all these people, and that's what I think, like you're just saying, you want to know what the science is, but one of the things that I would encourage people is the science is really good, but some of it's just common sense.
Yep.
Look at what maybe your great grandparents at this point for people, what were our great grandparents doing that was different than the way that we're living today? And some of it, the science is just teaching us like, oh, you know what? We just need to live more in harmony with the way that our bodies were designed, which is to be in the sun, to be in nature, to be living according to the cycles of the seasons, to be eating seasonally. It's just like, and also eating real food. Like highly processed food is very dangerous for us. And these are all things that now we have all these, science to say it, but it's like, okay, really, did we need that? Could we just look and see like we've gotten so far away from what's natural for us?
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, I'm snickering because this is an aside, but when one of my children was very young, they had food allergies, and we found out she had gluten and dairy allergies. Food intolerance is more than allergies, I guess is what we call them, IgG. And so we took her off of gluten and dairy, and we went to her pediatrician, and she said, how's she eating? We said, eating great. Is anything going on? Well, she doesn't eat gluten and dairy because she's allergic. And she goes, oh, we need to get you to a nutritionist. And I left the appointment and I kind of laughed and thought, if I told her we were eating the standard American diet, she wouldn't have blinked. But God forbid, she didn't have cow's milk or gluten. Like, get this. We need to have another professional involved here. So when you mention nutrition, it's kind of, I laugh at that, but it's really kind of scary that like, there's so much different points of view and thoughts on nutrition out there, but you're right. There is so much common sense. And I really believe in the power of listening to our bodies and trying to listen to your body. Cause I always tell folks that you go to a doctor and they tell you you're not right. Or they tell you, you say, hey doc, this thing's bugging me. I don't feel right. And they say, no, I did the test. Your blood looks good. Your pulse looks great. You're good. Don't ever take that, because the doctor only can like look at so many things. You've got like all these, we don't just have five senses. There's a lot going on inside. And when things are not right, oftentimes you can feel it if you'll listen to it. And but so many times we're just told to give away our agency, and like there's someone else who knows better. And so we just kind of trust that. But you're right. A lot of it is that common sense.
And I will say that almost everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people who I saw in my conventional medicine practice, even if the diagnosis got delayed, they knew something was going on.
Yes.
They may not have felt sick, but they knew something. And so what you just said is so important. If you did nothing else, just starting to listen to your body and listening to your knowing. Like, we know when something is not aligned within ourselves, but we've been taught to ignore it by the experts, by the, and this is really calling back your power. You know your body better than anyone else because you've been living in it. And if you find a doctor who won't listen to you, find someone else. Go find someone who will listen to you, because it's so common that someone will say, I knew something was wrong. And it was just because, the metrics. And also the other thing is, if you think about this too, is that the normal range for lab values, for blood pressure, heart rate, all those things are based on averages of the population. And look at the population. We are very sick. So do you really want to use the normal reference ranges of what's considered normal as to know if that's healthy? And then also, certain things where what's abnormal, what's that?
It's also demographics. Oftentimes it's not fully representative of all of our demographics.
Absolutely. And then, the levels that are considered normal can change depending on what medications come out. For example, statins. Right? Like 300 cholesterol was considered normal until we had statins. And then all of a sudden it was 200 and everyone has hypercholesterolemia. So anyway, I could go on and on. There's so many of those stories, but you're exactly right that listening to yourself, if you feel like there's something going on within yourself, really trusting that, and also trusting what you're feeling guided to do. If it doesn't feel aligned with the protocol that has been outlined for you, it's okay to question it. There's nothing wrong with you. And sometimes doctors make people feel really bad and say terrible things if you're choosing to do it a different way, but this is your body. You have one body. And so really being respectful of your body and what you need, and finding someone who can help you create an individualized path that can take you back to health.
That's amazing. So what do you see as the future of cancer care for us?
Well, I think the future of cancer care is the same thing as the future of the health of, modern society. And I think it comes back to real food, comes back to living a slower lifestyle, connecting with nature, and all the advanced treatments can help treat the symptom of cancer. But until we start really getting in tune with why are we getting so sick, and also the toxicity, it's unfortunate, but you really need to be doing some kind of detox protocol to stay healthy. Like, I don't have cancer and I'm doing a lot of things to make sure that my body is detoxified. Right. So I honestly think the future of all health is going back to the basics and learning what real food is and teach. But the truth is, there's no money in that. So that's not going to be the future of Western medicine for sure. But I think that's going to be the quiet revolution that if we want to get healthy, this is going to have to come from everyone saying enough is enough. We don't want to pay healthcare so that we can get sick and then have to heal ourselves. If we could just eat the right food and we could be doing the things that our bodies need to stay healthy in the first place. We shouldn't have children with obesity and fatty livers and all of these things, but we've also been taught to take the convenient way out.
Yeah.
And so I think some of it is like,
we're just one pill away from excellence.
Yes, exactly. Slow, hard work.
Well, Katie, if people want to learn more about you and some of the amazing work you're doing, how can they find out?
Sure. So my podcast is called Born to Heal with Dr. Katie Deming, and my website is katiedeming.com.
Awesome. Great. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Brad. I really appreciate the work that you do with 1000 Roads too. So thank you for having me. It's been my privilege to be with you.
Thank you.